So now that we finished the neckline, we are going to turn the dress back to the inside so that we have the right sides together. And now we are going to pin the side seams because we're going to sew the side seams in one fell swoop. So since this is a dolman style sleeve, which is this kind of weird all connected sleeve, we're just going to sew it all together. So the instructions say to match up the side notches. So we're going to start there. Once I get this flipped the right way. There we go. And then we're going to work our way around along that side seam and get that all pinned together. So this is just the usual pinning. I had initially thought I might sew this with that fancy knit stitch. I think it's going to be too big looking at the width of it right now. And I'm just going to sew it at a regular zigzag stitch. Plus, it just keeps things easier. So put in your pins and keep in mind that we're going to sew from the armhole, from the cuff down to the bottom of the hem. So when you put your pins in, make sure you pin accordingly so that you can line everything up with your machine just right. So I'm just going to get all your edges lined up and put in some pins. And then once you have finished pinning both sides, I'll meet you back at the sewing machine. So we're back at the sewing machine and we are sewing at 5/8 of an inch again. So I have my seam gauge set to 5/8 of an inch. I'm going to line up my fabric and lower my presser foot, and I'm going to roll my needle in to get started. Now my machine is back to the zigzag stitch that I have been sewing the rest of the seams with, and we are just going to start stitching. So this is pretty self-explanatory. We're just following this line down the sleeve and then down the edge of the garment. And we want to just let the fabric be fed through the machine just like we did with the other seams. So make sure that you have it spread out on your lap. Mine's on my lap, you can't see it, but anyway. So that it's not pulling and stretching as I'm sewing. You're just kind of gently guiding the fabric because you want the machine to do the work and not pull the fabric excessively. Okay. And if you need to slow down to do this, you totally can. I know with this knit, it's hard to not stretch it while you're sewing, so just work through and remove those pins as you get to them. Follow that curve around. And it got a little bit off here, so I'm gonna scooch that over. There we go. Scooch that over. And then take this pin out and make sure it's still all lined up. There we go. So we're just coming down to the other end and looks like I didn't do a great job when I cut this out because one side's a little longer than the other, but no worries, we're going to trim that once we do the hem. So I'm just going to finish this up, lift that needle, and go on to the other side. So we just have our seam all nice and sewn, and we can press that open again before we do the hem. So the next instruction step, number 10, actually says to go try on your dress and then mark the length that you want it to be, and then we're going to press the hem up accordingly. And so I tried on my dress, and the good news is that it fits pretty much the way that I wanted it to, but the bad news is that I stretched out the neckline, which is fine. It's not a big deal, but I have more of a boat neck than a tighter crew neck. No worries. If you stretch out your neck by accident, just remember that. Don't pull quite as hard when you attach the neckband to the neck line, and you should be good next time. So I remembered that I added 1.25 inches to the length of the pattern to make it a little bit longer, because I wanted the length of the dress to be what the finished length of the pattern was, and that still allowed for 1.25 inch hem. So I just added that to the bottom so that once I add the hem, then the length is exactly the length of B minus the hem that they said to put in. So we just built that in extra so that it would be more comfortable to wear. The thing to keep in mind about this dress, if you make the full length version, there is no slit in the back. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult to walk in, just that you'll be limited, your stride will be limited to the width of the dress at the bottom. So just keep that in mind. I have a dress kind of like that. It's fine to just wear normally, but if you're rushing and kind of walking fast, it gets a little tiresome. So that's another reason I wanted a shorter version of this dress. Because when I tried this on and everything works, and 1.25 inches is the perfect length hem, it's going to hit just above my knee, which is where I wanted it to. I am just going to fold up the bottom edge 1.25 inches. And you may be asking, well, what about that little part that was uneven at the side seams? I just trimmed that off. I matched the back and the front together, and it was just a tiny little bit on the edges. I think when I added the additional length to the pattern, I didn't cut it exactly straight. So that is what we're going to do now. We're just going to fold it up. The pattern hem guide, so at the bottom of the pattern along the hem for A and B layout, it says that 1.25 inches is recommended. Now you can always do what you want. If you're like, oh, it's a little bit short and I want this, you can always adjust it in the hem, you know, a little bit. I would say at least leave a 1/2 inch hem if you can. Like I said, I'm going with 1.5 inches. So I've got my hem gauge here. Let's go in for a closer look. Sewing on and starting at the center back seam again, I have my hem gauge put at 1.25 inches, and so I'm just going to line that up and then put in a pin. I'm going to go this way, and then I'm just going to go around to the side seam and do the same thing. And I'm going to do both side seams first and then go around the front and the back to make sure it all matches up. 1.25 inches. Yes. Yeah, that's the way I'm sewing. I have to think about it for a sec. There we go. So then I'm going to come back around and do a pin in the middle and make sure that all fits, and then just continue like this around the hem until you have the whole thing pinned. So while we're still at the cutting table, this is a great time to just pin up the sleeves as well. That way we can just go to the iron, press everything in place, and then go sew it up and finish our dress. So I checked the pattern and it says that the seam allowance, the hem allowance for the sleeve is also 1.25 inches like the hem of the dress. But when I tried this on, these sleeves are a little bit shorter than I thought they would be. And I'm going to only sew them about at, let me see, what can we do that at? About 1 inch, or actually 3/4 inch, because I think that'll be fine. And I don't really want them that much shorter. So that's what we're going to go with. And just like the hem, I'm going to start at both of these side seams first. Make sure you pin your seam allowances open, and then we're going to get that measured. There we go. And then we are just going to finish around the sides, just like we did for the hem. So it's pretty, these last couple of processes are pretty much exactly the same, and we're going to sew them the same way too. So just put in a pin, and then we're going to head over to the ironing board and give everything a quick press. So now that we have the hem and the sleeves all pinned into the length that we want, I did the hem at the suggested 1.25 inches, but I did the sleeve at 3/4 inch because I don't want it to be too short. And so we're just going to press, I'm going to feed this over the end of my ironing board to just kind of make that a little bit faster. My iron is ready to go, and now I'm just going to press in this hem, which is just going to make the whole sewing process a lot easier. So I'm going to let it cool for a sec, and then I'm going to move around and keep pressing. Okay, so just finishing up the hem. Last stretch. If you didn't press open the side seams, it would be a good time to do that before you press in the hem. I just pressed everything all together because it was going to be a little bit easier. That way you know that your side seams are open when you put up the hem. Same for the cuffs, so it's that same seam that we're working with. And finishing up the sleeve with the cuff, we're just going to press it as well. And just make sure you press those seams open so that they lie flat when you do this edge finish on the sleeve. So we have, we're starting with the sleeve just because that is going to be a little bit easier since it's just smaller, plus I'm about to run out of bobbin thread. Now, the instructions say to sew 1/4 inch from the top edge. So that is going to be this edge of my presser foot because it's 1/4 inch each way. So I'm just going to lower that down and line everything up. And then I've switched to a straight stitch, and since I'm sewing a straight stitch, you do need to stretch your fabric a little bit. Otherwise, once you put it on, you'll pop those stitches. So just keep that in mind. I'm starting at a seam, and I'm just stretching as I sew, and I'm keeping this outside edge lined up as I remove each of the pins as we go around. And then coming back to this one, I want to make sure I keep that seam allowance nice and smooth. I get that pin, and then stretch a little bit more. And we're coming back over, and I'm just going to go over the original stitches like last time, back stitch like twice, and then take it off. So you can see that once we flip it in, we've got that first line of stitching. There is going to be a little bit of a give to it since we did stretch it while we were sewing, and that way it'll go over your arm. The instructions then say to sew a second stitch line 1/4 inch from the first stitch line, and that might be a little crazy considering that I shorten this. Let me trim off these ends. Just to get those out of the way. Okay, so I don't really, 1/4 inch is going to put it back at that edge, which is not where I want it to be. So I think I'm going to, because if I go 1/4 inch from that, it's going to be right at the edge. So I think I'm going to sew from 1/4 inch from the other side, and that'll kind of put it closer, so there'll be a little bit of a space, about 1/8 inch between the two stitch lines, but I think that'll look much better. And let's start again on this seam here. And you could easily do this the other way, just start 1/4 inch from this and then move over 1/8 inch from that line if you want. And you probably have to flip your garment because it's probably just been twisting. So just finish that out and go over that original stitch line and then cut off those threads. And now we have a finished double stitch line on the bottom edge of the sleeve, and that's going to look really nice. So we're basically just repeating this exact same process on the hem. So moving on to the hem, I'm going to start with that center back seam as usual, and I'm going to line up the edge of the presser foot with this top raw edge to sew my first stitch line. And it's exactly the same as the other process. You can pull this hem. It's a little bit looser than the sleeve. I would recommend pulling it probably just a little bit so that everything, when you put it on, if you pull it over your hips, then it's not going to pop those stitches. You do not have to pull very hard though. So just kind of gently hold it, just stretch it out a little bit, but don't be like pulling really hard. So you don't want to distort the fabric, because if you pull too hard while you're sewing these stitches, then it's going to kind of have like a rippled edge along that stitch line. So let's get started. So we're just coming back around to the home stretch, still gently pulling to just stretch that fabric. And then we're just going to go over that and back stitch, and we are done. So that's going to be the first stitch line, and now we're going to go back and line it. So I've lined up at the center back seam. I have the stitch line that we just sewed at the edge of the presser foot, which means that's going to be 1/4 of an inch, and we are following the directions. So just start sewing. And we are just coming back around to the beginning. Pull those threads out of the way. And just like before, going over that original stitch line, back stitch, and we are finished. So now the hem is all done. So this is the finished dress. I put it on my dress form, even put in the sleeve so you could see this dolman sleeve detail here. And as you can see, it came out really well. It actually is gonna fit me really well, which I'm excited about. And the only difference from the pattern is the neckline. So I did actually stretch it out a little bit. It should be probably about an inch closer to the neck, a little bit closer fitting, but it's comfortable. It fits well. I'm not gonna stress about it. So just to review, this is Simplicity 9011, and it is an easy to sew pattern, and it really was easy to sew. So if you want to try out a knit pattern and are feeling kind of nervous about like the real technical ones where there's a lot more pieces, this one only has 3 pattern pieces and it's very easy to put together. The instructions actually make sense, and if you followed along with the video, you should be able to make a dress too. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to click like and subscribe to my channel so you never miss a stitch. And if you've got questions but no one to answer them, head on over to Let's Talk Sewing for Beginners, hosted by Sew Lounge. It's an interactive Facebook group where you can ask all the questions you want and I will get you some answers. Until we meet again, happy sewing!